The Avro Lancaster is a British four-engined Second World War heavy bomber designed and built by Avro for the Royal Air Force. It first saw active service with RAF Bomber Command in 1942, and, as the strategic bombing offensive over Europe gathered momentum, it was the central implement for the nighttime bombing campaigns that followed. It became the main heavy bomber used by the RAF, the RCAF, and squadrons from other Commonwealth and European countries serving within the RAF, overshadowing its close contemporaries the Handley Page Halifax and Short Stirling. The Lanc, as it was affectionately known, thus became one of the more famous and most successful of the Second World War night bombers, delivering 608,612 long tons of bombs in 156,000 sorties. The Lancaster, an evolution of the troublesome Avro Manchester, was designed by Roy Chadwick and was powered by 4 Rolls-Royce Merlins, or, in one version, Bristol Hercules engines. A long, unobstructed bomb bay meant that the Lancaster could take the largest bombs used by the RAF, including the 4,000-pound, 8,000-pound, and 12,000-pound blockbusters, loads often supplemented with smaller bombs or incendiaries. The versatility of the Lancaster was such that it was chosen to equip 617 Squadron and was modified to carry the upkeep, bouncing bomb, designed by Barnes-Wallis for Operation Chastise, the attack on Germany Ruhr Valley dams. Although the Lancaster was primarily a night bomber, it excelled in many other roles, including daylight precision bombing. In the latter role, some Lancasters were adapted to carry the 12,000-pound Tallboy and then the 22,000-pound Grand Slam earthquake bombs. In 1943, a Lancaster was converted to become an engine test bed for the Metropolitan Vickers F2 turbojet. Lancasters were later used to test other engines, including the Armstrong Siddeley Mamba and Rolls-Royce Dart turboprops, and the Avro Canada Orenda and Stahl-Doven turbojets. Post-war, the Lancaster was supplanted as the RAF's main strategic bomber by the Avro Lincoln, a larger version of the Lancaster. The Lancaster took on the role of long-range anti-submarine patrol aircraft and air-sea rescue. It was also used for photo reconnaissance and aerial mapping, as a flying tanker for aerial refueling, and as the Avro Lancastrian, a long-range, high-speed, transatlantic, passenger and postal delivery airliner. In March 1946, a Lancastrian of BSAA flew the first scheduled flight from the new London Heathrow Airport. Development. The origins of the Lancaster stem from a twin-engined bomber design submitted to meet Air Ministry Specification P1336, which was for a new generation of twin-engine medium bombers for worldwide use. The engine specified as the Rolls-Royce Vulture. The resulting aircraft was the Manchester, which, although a capable aircraft, was underpowered and troubled by the unreliability of the Vulture engine. Only 200 Manchesters were built, with the type withdrawn from service in 1942. Avro's chief design engineer, Roy Chadwick, was already working on an improved Manchester design using 4 of the more reliable, but less powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, in the form of standardized Merlin power eggs, developed for the Beaufighter II, installed on a larger wing. The aircraft was initially designated Avro Type 683 Manchester III, and later renamed the Lancaster. The prototype aircraft BT-308 was assembled by Avro's experimental flight department at Manchester's Ringway Airport. Test pilot H.A. Bill Thorne took the controls for its first flight at Ringway, on Thursday 9 January 1941. The aircraft proved to be a great improvement on its predecessor, being one of the few warplanes in history to be, right from the start, its initial 3-fin tail layout. A result of the design being adapted from the Manchester I, was quickly changed on the second prototype DG595 and subsequent production aircraft, to the familiar twin-fin specification also used on the later Manchesters. Some of the later orders for Manchesters were changed in favour of Lancasters. The designs were very similar and both featured the same distinctive greenhouse cockpit, turret nose, and twin tail. The Lancaster discarded the stubby central third tail fin of the early Manchesters and used the wider span tailplane and larger elliptical twin fins from the later Manchester IA. The majority of Lancasters built during the war years were manufactured by Avro at their factory at Chadderton near Oldham, Greater Manchester, and test-flown from Woodford Aerodrome in Cheshire. Other Lancasters were built by Metropolitan Vickers and Armstrong Whitworth. It was also produced at the Austin Motor Company Works in Longbridge, Birmingham. Later in the Second World War and post-war by Vickers Armstrongs at Chester as well as at the Vickers Armstrong factory, Castle Bromwich, Birmingham. Only 300 of the Lancaster B2 fitted with Bristol Hercules engines were constructed. This was a stopgap modification caused by a shortage of Merlin engines as fighter production was of higher priority. The Lancaster B3 had Packard Merlin engines but was otherwise identical to contemporary Bs, with 3030 BIIIs built, almost all at Avro's Newton Heath factory. The BI and B3 were built concurrently, and minor modifications were made to both marks as new batches were ordered. Examples of these modifications were the relocation of the pitot head from the nose to the side of the cockpit, and the change from de Havilland needle blade propellers to Hamilton Standard or Nash Kelvinator-made paddle blade propellers. Of later variants, only the Canadian-built Lancaster BX, manufactured by Victory Aircraft in Moulton, Ontario, was produced in significant numbers. A total of 430 of this type were built, earlier examples differing little from their British-built predecessors, except for using Packard-built Merlin engines and American-style instrumentation and electrics. The first Lancaster produced in Canada was named the Raw Express. The final production version was the Lancaster Mark VII and was made by the Austin Motor Company at their Longbridge factory. The main design difference with the Mark VII was the use of the American-built Martin dorsal gun turret in place of the English Nash and Thompson one. They had to be mounted slightly further forward on the fuselage for weight balance. All were produced too late for the war in Europe and were tropicalized and upgraded as the Mark VII for use in the Far East against Japan. A total of 7,377 Lancasters of all marks were built throughout the duration of the war, each at a 1943 cost of £45 minus 50,000.